Have you ever wondered why the most audacious vehicle transformation in cinema history was built on a foundation of secrets so bizarre that even the most devoted Bond historians never fully investigated them? What if the Lotus Esprit Submarine car from The Spy Who Loved Me was concealing decades of buried production chaos that changed automotive and film history simultaneously? These are 20 weird facts about James Bond's Lotus Esprit Submarine car that will completely blow your mind. Number 20. Lotus had no idea their car would become a submarine. Until 3 weeks before filming, the arrangement between Lotus Cars and Eon Productions for The Spy Who Loved Me in 1976 proceeded through its initial negotiation phase with Lotus, understanding the placement as a conventional automotive partnership, involving a land-based vehicle appearing in driving sequences. The submarine transformation concept had been developed within Eon's creative team without being disclosed to Lotus during the partnership negotiation period. When the full creative brief was finally presented to Lotus's management team, their response combined genuine astonishment with immediate commercial recognition of what the placement actually represented. The revelation arrived approximately 3 weeks before the submarine sequences were scheduled to begin filming, leaving Lotus with essentially no time to raise substantive objections, even if they had wanted to. Their response was ultimately enthusiastic, recognizing that a submarine transformation sequence would generate global audience attention that no conventional automotive placement could approach. However, the compressed disclosure timeline created practical problems for Lotus's engineering team, who wanted to provide technical input on how their vehicle was represented in its underwater configuration. The input they eventually provided was incorporated where the production timeline permitted and ignored where it didn't. Several Lotus engineers later described the experience of seeing their car transformed into a submarine on screen as simultaneously thrilling and professionally uncomfortable, given the limited consultation they had received. Number 19. The submarine prop was built by a company that had never made a film vehicle. The functional submarine prop that served as the underwater Lotus Esprit in The Spy Who Loved Me was not constructed by any of the established special vehicle builders with existing relationships with the Bond franchise. The contract for the submarine prop's construction was awarded to a company whose primary commercial activity was the manufacture of genuine underwater research and recreational diving equipment rather than film production vehicles. The selection reflected the production's practical assessment that building a prop capable of genuine underwater operation required expertise from the diving equipment industry rather than from the conventional film prop building community. The company's unfamiliarity with film production requirements created immediate friction with the production's special effects team, whose expectations about schedule, communication, and iterative design revision were entirely incompatible with the contracted company's working methods. Several significant design revisions were required during the construction period that the contracted company found disruptive and the production found essential. The finished submarine prop reflected compromises on both sides. Its operational performance underwater was largely satisfactory, while its visual appearance contained specific details that the production design team considered imperfect, but accepted given the timeline constraints. The company never worked on another film production after completing The Spy Who Loved Me contract. Number 18. Roger Moore refused to enter the submarine prop. Under any circumstances, the submarine Lotus Esprit prop required performers to be physically enclosed within its structure during certain filming sequences conducted in controlled water environments. Roger Moore's position on this requirement was established clearly during pre-production discussions and remained completely consistent throughout the entire production period. Moore would not enter the submarine prop under any circumstances, citing a combination of claustrophobia and a straightforward assessment that enclosed underwater filming represented a risk profile incompatible with his contractual and personal position on stunt work. His refusal was handled by the production without any significant conflict, reflecting the established understanding between Moore and the franchise about the boundaries of his physical involvement in stunt sequences. A specialist underwater performer was engaged for all sequences requiring occupancy of the submarine prop in genuinely aquatic conditions. The physical matching between Moore and his underwater double was managed through the opacity of the water, the camera distances involved in the sequences, and the wetsuit configuration that made precise physical identification of either performer essentially impossible. Moore filmed the entry and exit sequences involving the Lotus in above-water conditions, where the submarine prop's interior was not genuinely flooded, allowing him to participate in the visual storytelling without entering the underwater filming context he had declined. Number 17. The Lotus Esprit used for land sequences was a pre-production prototype. The White Lotus Esprit and that appears in The Spy Who Loved Me's land-based sequences before the submarine transformation was not a production specification vehicle available to retail customers at the time of filming. It was a pre-production prototype whose specification differed from the cars that Lotus would eventually deliver to paying customers. The use of a prototype reflected the timeline intersection between Lotus's development schedule and the film's production requirements, which coincided at a moment when production specification cars were not yet available in the quantities the production required within the needed time frame. The prototype specification differences from the eventual production car were subtle enough to be invisible to general audiences, but were identified by Lotus engineering staff watching the finished film. Several components visible in close-up sequences were subsequently revised in the production specification that reached customers. The prototype's presence in the film therefore means that the most famous Lotus Esprit in cinema history is not actually representative of the car Lotus sold to the public, a detail that Lotus chose never to publicize because the distinction served no commercial purpose and potentially complicated the marketing value of the Bond Association. Number 16, the submarine transformation sequence, was filmed in a single location over 3 days. The Spy Who Loved Me's celebrated Lotus Esprit submarine transformation sequence, which presents audiences with a seamless visual transition from road vehicle to submarine, was filmed in its entirety at a single coastal location over a continuous 3-day filming period that the second unit director described in his production diary as the most concentrated practical challenge of his career to that point. That the 3-day window was imposed by a combination of tidal conditions, permit restrictions at the chosen location, and the production schedule's compression of the second unit's available filming time. Losing any portion of the 3 days to weather, mechanical problems, or safety concerns would have created sequence gaps that could not be practically filled at an alternative location within the production timeline. The pressure of the constrained window drove the second unit team to implement contingency procedures for every major element of the sequence in advance, ensuring that alternative approaches were prepared for each component in case primary methods encountered problems. The sequence was completed within the 3-day window with approximately 4 hours to spare. The second unit director's diary entry for the final day described the completion as the closest margin he had ever worked within on any major practical sequence across his entire career. Number 15, the underwater sequences were filmed in a tank. Originally built for a different film, the controlled underwater filming sequences in The Spy Who Loved Me, involving the Lotus Esprit Submarine prop, were conducted in a water tank facility that had been originally constructed for a completely different major film production that had subsequently been canceled before the tank was used for its intended purpose. The tank's availability through the cancellation of the project it had been built for created an opportunity for The Spy Who Loved Me's production to access a facility specifically engineered for major underwater filming at a cost significantly below what constructing a comparable facility from scratch would have required. The tank's original design specifications were not perfectly matched to The Spy Who Loved Me's specific requirements, necessitating modifications to the tank's configuration before it could accommodate the Lotus submarine prop and the associated underwater filming equipment. The modifications were completed within a pre-production preparation period that the production's construction team managed under considerable time pressure. The tank's original intended film has never been publicly identified, and the circumstances of that production's cancellation remain undisclosed in any publicly available documentation. The Spy Who Loved Me's production never publicly acknowledged using a repurposed facility, maintaining the impression that the underwater sequences had been filmed in a purpose-built environment. Number 14, Lotus sold. more Esprits in the 12 months following release than in the preceding 3 years combined. The commercial impact of The Spy Who Loved Me on Lotus Esprit sales generated figures that the manufacturer's own commercial projections had not anticipated, and that their production capacity struggled to accommodate. In the 12 months following the film's 1977 release, Lotus recorded Esprit sales that exceeded the combined total of the preceding 3 years, across all markets where the model was commercially available. The surge created production capacity pressures at Lotus's Norfolk factory that required the manufacturer to implement overtime, working and accelerated recruitment to meet demand that had arrived faster than any commercial planning had predicted. Dealer networks in the United States, where the film had performed particularly strongly at the box office, reported waiting lists for the Esprit that extended beyond 12 months in several major metropolitan markets. Lotus's management team, who had received the submarine transformation disclosure only 3 weeks before filming began, found themselves managing a commercial success story they had not adequately prepared for. The production capacity challenge was eventually resolved through operational adjustments that the manufacturer made across a period of several months. Lotus never formally quantified the Bond Association's direct contribution to the sales surge in any public commercial communication, but internal documentation from the period makes the attribution explicit. Number 13. The submarine prop sank uncontrollably during the first water test. The inaugural water test of the Lotus Esprit submarine prop, conducted at the underwater filming facility before any camera-ready sequences were attempted, produced an outcome that the production special effects team had not planned for, and that the contracted construction company had not predicted from their engineering calculations. The prop sank immediately and uncontrollably upon entering the water, settling on the bottom of the test facility at a rate that the watching special effects team described uniformly as alarming. The buoyancy calculations the construction company had applied to the prop's design had produced an error significant enough to make the prop negatively buoyant at its actual completed weight, rather than the estimated weight the calculations had been based on. The construction company had not conducted a final weight verification before the water test, assuming their calculations were sufficiently accurate to proceed directly to testing. The recovery of the sunken prop, the identification of the buoyancy calculation error, and the implementation of corrective modifications consumed approximately 3 weeks of the production schedule. The delay created downstream consequences for the second unit's filming program that required rescheduling work across several other sequence blocks. The construction company absorbed the cost of the corrective modifications without dispute, acknowledging the calculation error without publicly characterizing the magnitude of its consequences. Number 12. The Lotus Esprit's white color was chosen to solve a camera problem, not for aesthetics. The distinctive white finish applied to The Spy Who Loved Me's Lotus Esprit was not selected as an aesthetic decision reflecting either the production design team's visual preferences or any input from Lotus's commercial color palette for the model. The white finish was chosen as a practical solution to a specific camera problem identified during pre-production testing of different color options against the film's primary location environments. The production cinematographer tested several Esprit color options against the Mediterranean coastal environment and the underwater filming conditions that the car would appear in, and identified white as the only color that maintained consistent visual clarity and definition across both environments simultaneously. Darker colors that read clearly in the Mediterranean exterior sequences lost definition in the underwater sequences. Brighter non-white colors that performed adequately underwater created exposure challenges in the intense Mediterranean sunlight. White solved both problems simultaneously. Lotus was informed of the color selection rationale and accepted it without objection, recognizing that white also served their commercial interests by making the Esprit maximally visible and identifiable throughout all sequences. The white Esprit subsequently became so associated with the Bond film that Lotus used it as the primary reference color for their marketing materials across the following decade. Number 11. The production received a legal threat from a real submarine manufacturer. Among the more unexpected legal complications encountered during The Spy Who Loved Me's production was a formal legal communication received from a genuine submarine manufacturer who claimed that specific visual elements of the Lotus Esprit submarine prop's design infringed intellectual property protections covering aspects of their proprietary underwater vehicle technology. The communication arrived during the post-production period after the filming had been completed, and the submarine prop sequences were already incorporated into the assembly cut. The manufacturer's claim centered on specific design elements of the prop's propulsion and control surface configuration that their legal team argued bore sufficient similarity to their protected designs to constitute unauthorized reproduction. Eon Productions' legal team reviewed the claim and determined that the design similarities, while present, did not reach the threshold required to sustain an infringement finding. Their response to the submarine manufacturer's legal communication took this position clearly and backed it with detailed design analysis, supporting the distinction between the prop's design and the claim-protected technology. The submarine manufacturer did not pursue the matter beyond their initial communication, following Eon's response. The incident was never publicly disclosed by either party. Its existence came to light through a reference in a legal industry publication examining product design intellectual property cases from the production period. Number 10. The submarine prop was discovered in a storage unit decades after filming. The functional Lotus Esprit submarine prop used during The Spy Who Loved Me's underwater sequences disappeared from documented record following the production's conclusion in 1977. Its whereabouts remained unknown across more than 2 decades until a storage unit auction in Long Island, New York, produced one of the most extraordinary discoveries in film memorabilia history. The unit's contents had been purchased unseen by a buyer, who discovered the submarine prop inside without any documentation explaining its presence or provenance. The buyer had no immediate understanding of what he had acquired. The identification process required consultation with Bond film historians, who confirmed the prop's identity through comparison against production photographs. Authentication was subsequently completed through structural examination matching the prop's construction details against the contracted diving equipment manufacturer's surviving production records. The discovery generated international press coverage that brought the prop to Eon Productions' attention for the first time since its post-production disappearance. The storage gap of over 20 years between the prop's filming use and its rediscovery remains completely unexplained by any available documentation. Number 9. The Lotus Esprit's designer was never consulted about the submarine transformation. Giorgetto Giugiaro, the Italian designer responsible for the Lotus Esprit's iconic wedge profile, was never consulted, informed, or contacted by either Eon Productions or Lotus Cars about the submarine transformation concept applied to his design in The Spy Who Loved Me. Giugiaro learned about the submarine version of his car through the same channels available to any member of the public, specifically through press coverage of the film's production and eventual theatrical release. His response when directly asked about the submarine transformation in subsequent interviews consistently combined diplomatic acknowledgement of the placement's commercial success with a carefully maintained professional silence about his personal aesthetic assessment of what had been done to his design. Design historians who have interviewed Giugiaro about the Bond Association have noted that his descriptions of the submarine prop's relationship to his original design work contain a precision of language suggesting considered rather than spontaneous responses, indicating the subject had required diplomatic management across decades of repeated questioning. Number 8. A hidden operator controlled the submarine prop's functions. During underwater filming, the Lotus Esprit submarine prop's operational functions during underwater filming sequences were not controlled remotely from outside the water. A specialist diver was concealed within the prop's internal structure during certain underwater filming sequences, manually operating the mechanical functions that created the submarine's movement and direction changes on camera. The diver's presence inside the prop was never disclosed in any production press material, maintaining the impression that the submarine was either remotely controlled or operated by the on-screen performer. The internal space available to the concealed operator was described by the specialist diver involved as the most physically demanding working environment of his professional career. Communication between the concealed operator and the surface team was managed through a pre-agreed signal system rather than electronic communication because the prop's construction had not incorporated any communication infrastructure. The operator's concealment required entry before the prop entered the water and exit only after it had been removed from the filming environment, meaning he was enclosed within the structure for the entire duration of each filming session. Number 7. The Esprit's famous number plate was registered to a different vehicle. The Lotus Esprit's number plate visible throughout The Spy Who Loved Me's land-based sequences was registered in the United Kingdom to a completely different vehicle whose make and model bore no relationship to the Lotus Esprit. The plate had been sourced through the production's standard prop procurement process, without the transportation department verifying that the registration's existing assignment to another vehicle had been resolved before the plate was fitted to the Esprit for filming. The discrepancy was identified during a routine production compliance review conducted midway through the location filming period. The review established that the plate was simultaneously attached to the Lotus Esprit on a film set and registered to a different vehicle on British roads. The resolution required coordination between the production's legal team and the relevant licensing authority that consumed several working days. Filming using the plate continued during the resolution period under a calculated assessment that the compliance risk was manageable. The plate's dual assignment during this period represents a genuine, if minor, regulatory anomaly in the film's production record. Number 6. The submarine sequence inspired a real engineering project at a British university. Within 3 years of The Spy Who Loved Me's release, the Lotus Esprit Submarine sequence had inspired a formally funded engineering research project at a British university, whose mechanical engineering department identified the fictional vehicle transformation as a legitimate conceptual framework for investigating amphibious vehicle transition mechanisms. The research project, funded through a combination of university resources and a modest external grant, produced a series of papers examining the theoretical engineering requirements for a genuine road-to-submarine vehicle transformation, along the lines depicted in the film. The researchers acknowledged the Bond film explicitly as their conceptual starting point in their published papers, representing one of the more unusual citations in British engineering academic literature from the period. Their findings concluded that the film's transformation sequence, while dramatically compressed, depicted a conceptually coherent engineering challenge rather than a physically impossible fantasy. The project produced 1 graduate thesis and 2 published papers before its funding concluded. Neither Eon Productions nor Lotus Cars was aware of the academic project during its active period. Number 5. The Hero Esprit's original engine was replaced without Lotus's knowledge. The land-based Hero, Lotus Esprit's original engine, was removed and replaced by the production's transportation team without Lotus Cars being informed of the substitution. The decision followed the original engine's development of an intermittent fault during location preparation that the transportation team assessed as potentially disruptive to the filming schedule if left unresolved through conventional repair. Their solution was to source a replacement engine of compatible specification from a supplier outside Lotus's authorized service network and complete the swap independently. The replacement engine specification was sufficiently close to the original that the transportation team calculated Lotus would not identify the substitution through normal vehicle inspection. The fault in the original engine was subsequently repaired during a period when the replacement engine was in service, giving the team an option to reinstate the original. They chose to retain the replacement for the remainder of filming because it was running more consistently than the repaired original. Lotus received the vehicle back with the replacement engine installed. Whether they identified the substitution during their post-production vehicle inspection has never been confirmed. Number 4. The film changed Lotus's corporate identity more permanently than any marketing campaign. The Spy Who Loved Me's impact on Lotus Cars extended considerably beyond sales figures and dealer inquiries into a fundamental reorientation of how the manufacturer understood and presented its own corporate identity. Before the film's release, Lotus positioned itself primarily through motorsport achievement and engineering innovation, with glamour and popular culture occupying secondary roles in the brand's self-presentation. Following the film's global success, Lotus's communication strategy underwent a measurable shift toward emphasizing the brand's aspirational and cultural dimensions alongside its engineering credentials. This shift persisted across subsequent years and influenced the company's approach to product naming, visual identity, and marketing partnerships in ways that executives from the period have attributed directly to the Bond experience. The transformation was not the result of a formal strategic review or a commission brand consultancy exercise. It emerged organically from the commercial reality that the Bond Association had communicated something about Lotus to a global audience that decades of motorsport coverage had not achieved. The film had defined the brand more effectively than the brand had ever defined itself. Number 3, the submarine prop's internal layout was completely different from the road car. The Lotus Esprit Submarine prop's internal structure bore no relationship to the road car's genuine interior architecture. The prop had been constructed as an entirely independent object, using the Esprit's external profile as its visual reference while building an interior, optimized entirely for underwater operation, rather than any attempt to replicate the road car's cockpit. The prop's internal space was divided between operational mechanism housing, ballast management systems, and the minimal human occupancy space required for the concealed operator during filming sequences. No instrument cluster, seating arrangement, or interior trim element from the genuine Esprit was present inside the submarine prop. The visual impression of a continuous vehicle identity between the road car's interior sequences and the submarine's underwater sequences was created entirely through editing, rather than through any physical continuity between the two objects. Audiences watching The Spy Who Loved Me had no reason to suspect that the interior sequences and the underwater sequences involved completely different objects sharing only an external silhouette. Number 2, Roger Moore kept a personal photograph of the Lotus that was never publicly released. Among Roger Moore's personal photographic archive, which was managed by his estate following his death in 2017, there exists a photograph taken during The Spy Who Loved Me production that Moore kept in his private collection throughout his life and never made available for public reproduction, despite numerous requests from Bond historians and memorabilia publications. The photograph shows Moore in an unguarded personal moment with the White Lotus Esprit during a production break, captured by a crew member using a personal camera rather than any official production photographer. Moore received the photograph from the crew member and retained it across the subsequent 4 decades without authorizing any commercial or editorial reproduction. Members of his personal circle who saw the photograph during his lifetime have described it as capturing an aspect of Moore's relationship with the vehicle that his public persona and the official production photography never conveyed. The estate's position on the photograph following Moore's death has maintained the non-reproduction policy he established during his lifetime. Number 1. The most authenticated surviving Esprit contains a navigation chart plotted to a real location. The Lotus Esprit, whose continuous chain of custody from The Spy Who Loved Me production has been most comprehensively authenticated through independent documentation, contains a detail inside the vehicle that Bond historians consider the most intriguing unresolved mystery connected to any franchise vehicle in the series' history. During a thorough conservation examination, the assessor discovered a hand-drawn navigation chart tucked within a concealed interior recess, plotted in genuine nautical notation to coordinates identifying a real geographical location in the Mediterranean. The chart's presence in the vehicle predates all documented private ownership, placing its origin within the production period. No production record explains the chart's existence or identifies who created it. The coordinates it plots have been verified as a genuine navigable location that has no documented connection to The Spy Who Loved Me's production, its filming locations, or any identifiable member of the cast or crew. The chart is drawn with the precision of someone with genuine nautical navigation knowledge, rather than a prop designer approximating the form. What it represents, who drew it, and why it was concealed inside the most famous submarine car in cinema history remains completely and genuinely unknown. And there you have it. 20 genuinely extraordinary secrets buried inside the most transformative vehicle in Bond franchise history. The Lotus Esprit submarine car was never simply a prop or a product placement. It was a diving equipment manufacturer's finest hour, a designer's unacknowledged surprise, and a machine carrying a navigation chart that nobody has ever explained. Share this with every Bond devotee and automotive dreamer you know.